Fayetteville County Sheriff's Office.
I believe I've seen a dead person. Their face looks all beat up.
I just couldn't understand why somebody would do that.
There's someone going out and killing people. We don't know what the circumstances are.
We were able to review surveillance videos that show this white SUV heading towards our crime scene.
We needed to interview these 3 people and see where they were on the night of the murder.
Let me tell you this, okay?
I've got you on video. We've got you on video.
Uncle Johnny, he had come by our house.
I have gifts for my birthday, girls. Oh, good to see you.
And he had brought some birthday gifts for our daughter and for my wife, who have a birthday within 7 days of each other. Uncle Johnny was a very fun guy to be around. He was very welcoming, very warm, and very kind.
Here you go.
We lived about an hour and 30 minutes from my mother's house in Mobile, Alabama, where my Uncle Johnny, my mother, and my grandmother lived. My Uncle Johnny started working as a flight attendant when he lived in Venezuela. He loved to travel around the world, and he got to meet a lot of people. After my Uncle Johnny stopped being a flight attendant, he moved to the United States and started working in the aerospace company as an interior mechanic. He was very social. He was going on dates, but he didn't have a long-time partner at the time.
Finally found Mr. Right?
No, but hope springs eternal.
Johnny was looking for Mr. Right, if you will.
Maybe one day. Yeah.
He has so much to offer, and I think he wanted to share that with someone.
You have a great birthday. Take care. Good. Charlie? Gotta go. Play later. All right? Say bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Say bye.
Bye-bye.
Dile bye a tío.
Fayetteville County Sheriff's Office.
There's a cul-de-sac off of Boiler Road. I believe I've seen a dead person laying there.
Okay.
Their face looks all beat up. And they're laying there on their back. I'm pretty sure it's a human. I can get out to look. It was freaking me out a little bit.
All right. We'll get a deputy to meet you there, okay?
Thank you, ma'am.
It took 20 to 30 minutes to get to the scene. I was the commander over Criminal Investigations Division. It was in a remote area, so it was clearly a dump job. It was in a dead end of what was going to be a residential area that never really got developed. So there were no cameras or anything in the immediate scene.
Patrol officers secure the location before the investigators arrive.
What do we have here?
Detective Gazier was the lead investigator assigned to this case.
EMS arrived with patrol officers, and they checked the vitals of the victim, and he was pronounced deceased on the scene.
There was lividity and rigor mortis setting in, so we knew that he had been expired for at least a few hours.
The trauma, it appeared to be a gunshot wound above his right eye.
There was apparent blunt force trauma to his face with teeth missing. His pants pockets had been turned inside out. There was loose change on the ground.
Looking around further, we found the tooth and a toothbridge. We looked for a cell phone and a wallet and could not find one.
There was a debit card lying near the body, which allowed us to quickly identify the victim.
Johnny Sokies. Run it. See what comes up.
We were able to take the name off of the ATM debit card, Mr. Johnny Sokies, and put it into our system. Was able to pull his driver's license picture up and identify him.
Contact the bank, get the bank transaction records.
Our next move was to make contact with Mr. Sokies' family. Johnny's address was about 6 miles away from the crime scene.
Hello.
My grandmother called me
Abuela, ¿qué pasó?
very frantically that morning. The cops knocked on her door, and my grandmother doesn't speak any English, so she gave the investigator the phone.
How can I help?
They told me that my uncle had been murdered.
I'll be right there.
When I arrived at the house, the investigators were there, as well as my husband. And then my mother got home.
Mami, siéntate. Mataron a Johnny.
No. Fue muy difícil, muy doloroso. Johnny era mi hermano. Nos abrazamos y lloramos y no sabíamos qué había pasado.
There's a language barrier with Inui, so Donnie was our translator.
Can you think of anyone who would want to hurt Johnny?
¿Hay alguien que le quiere hacer daño?
No.
Johnny had no enemies. I don't know of anyone that Johnny disagreed with.
Was he in a relationship?
I immediately told them about the dating app and the social media accounts.
Johnny was using the apps to look for relationships and love.
Do you know when he left?
¿Sabe a qué hora se fue?
Inui stated she went to bed around 10 p.m. and Johnny was still watching television. Around 7 a.m. when she woke up, she found Johnny's bedroom door open and the front door unlocked. We asked Inui if Johnny had left in his vehicle, and she said no, that the car was still there. She stated that Johnny had to have left with a friend or someone he knew.
A search of his room and the residence revealed that there was no wallet or cell phone of Mr. Sokies found at his house.
Thank you very much for your help. Nazir.
Meantime, investigators receive a list of Johnny's bank transactions.
Okay.
We made contact with Wells Fargo, and they provided us with Johnny's last transaction, which was a withdrawal from an ATM about 10 minutes away from Johnny's house. That was made at 3:25 a.m. on the morning Johnny was killed. We also found out that the ATM had surveillance, and they advised they would be sending us those surveillance shots the next morning.
Investigators search Johnny's neighborhood for home security cameras that might reveal when he left home to go to the ATM.
We observed some cameras on a house about 3 houses east of Johnny's residence. We made contact with that resident.
Hey, I'm Deputy Kazir. Can we take a look at the footage from that camera?
We knew Johnny was at the ATM at 3:25, so we started looking at the surveillance footage starting at 3 a.m. She tells us that it's motion activated and that it only picks up when motion such as a vehicle or someone walks by in front of the residence.
Play that part again.
At 3:15, we observed a white mid-sized SUV traveling towards Johnny Soki's house.
Who's behind the wheel?
It didn't show the SUV physically at Mr. Soki's house, but at that particular time, at 3:15 in the morning, most people are asleep. This was the only vehicle in the area.
How's it there?
The camera captures the partial roadway.
Zoom in there.
We attempted to zoom in to get a description of the driver and the license plate, but it was just too distorted.
We're not able to make out a specific make and model.
We could just get the color of the vehicle and that it was a white SUV.
Play it.
This residence with the surveillance is 3 houses down and just on the opposite side of the street. So we believe as it gets off of the camera angle, it stops at Johnny's residence, picks him up, and then they leave that location.
We knew that he had gotten a ride from someone because we think he's minutes later at the ATM. And this clearly validates that he did leave with another person.
Thanks, Mary.
Investigators review the information from local traffic cameras to try to identify the SUV.
So we gathered data from a tag reader that we have located at Children's Airport near the ATM. Tag reader had picked up a vehicle matching the description from the surveillance camera. This time of morning, that was the only vehicle that passed through the intersection.
We ran the vehicle's license plate to figure out who the registered owner was.
Located that vehicle at an apartment complex, followed that vehicle from the apartment complex to the airport, and then made an investigative stop. I was notified, and then I responded out. There was just one occupant in the vehicle, which was the driver. So I interviewed that individual on the scene at the airport. The driver was identified, and he worked for Allied Taxi Service. I'd asked him if he had picked Johnny up, and he said no. He stated he picked up a couple of fares in the area. I asked him what time. He said he picked up a fare from a hotel and then was at the airport at around 3:25.
I went to the airport to gather surveillance footage.
Let's start from 3:25. There it is. Zoom in there.
The footage showed the taxi driver at the airport at 3:25 dropping fares off.
And we knew that at 3:25, Johnny Soki's and another white SUV were at the Wells Fargo bank withdrawing money. So the taxi driver was telling the truth about what he had done and where he had been. His story was corroborated with video evidence, and he was no longer a person of interest after that.
Okay, thanks.
The next morning, Johnny's family are still coming to terms with what's happened.
No tengo idea por qué un ser humano le quita la vida a otro ser humano, más mi hermano Johnny.
It was very sad and quiet. He was always the loud one, and not having him there and knowing what happened it was really hard for all of us.
seeing his bedroom off the corner of the living room. Knowing that he's never going to walk through the door again was the hardest part.
So on October 26th, the day after Johnny Soke's murder, I received the footage from Wells Fargo of Mr. Soke's transaction.
I got images from the bank.
So we're expecting, a full motion video, but this was just still shots of the transaction.
Show me the first one. That's Johnny.
We see Johnny standing at the ATM holding his phone and his wallets. He's wearing a red shirt, the same red shirt that we found him in at the crime scene.
Show me the next image. Zoom in on the background.
And then we also see this white SUV in the background that matched the description of the surveillance that we had captured from Johnny's neighborhood. This is big. At this point, we knew Johnny had his wallet and his phone on him. And then this also confirms the vehicle that we observed in Johnny's neighborhood as being the vehicle that picked him up.
I think I recognize the model.
We was able to key in on a feature on that vehicle. There was a light that was located underneath the side view mirror. So it appeared to be a Lincoln Aviator.
Go to the next one. Who's that?
We can see Johnny Soke's in the video with an unknown black male standing behind him and the white SUV in the background behind that male.
This didn't seem right. This individual standing behind Johnny.
Can you clean it up? This is the best I can get.
We knew that we needed to find out who this individual was.
We want to track where this vehicle came from to look for other video where we could get a visual of the driver of the vehicle.
So at this point, we've established Johnny was picked up at his residence. He had made the withdrawal at the ATM, and then we established the crime scene where Johnny's body was located.
We were able to pull up an aerial map of the subdivision. There's only 2 points of entrance and exit to this neighborhood, and that helped you determine where to canvass for surveillance video.
Deputies search for security cameras along the route between Johnny's house, the ATM, and the crime scene.
We were able to retrieve surveillance videos from multiple businesses with several different cameras.
Play it.
Palmer's Airport Toyota has a surveillance camera that captures the ATM across the street.
Play that part again. Zoom in there. There goes the Lincoln.
At 3:24, I see the white Lincoln Aviator pull up across the street at the Wells Fargo ATM. And we can see Johnny walk to the ATM. He goes back to the car.
Once he leaves the ATM, we need to see which route he took to get to Linda Court.
Bring up the next camera.
We're able to almost live time see the progression of where this vehicle goes.
At 3:27 a.m., the Food Mart on Dawes Road captures the white Lincoln Aviator traveling southwest, which is about a mile from the ATM.
Pause it there and punch in on the plate.
We were unable to get a tag number off of the white Lincoln Aviator.
What else we got?
At 3:31, we observed the white Lincoln Aviator pass in front of Pete's Place, which is about 1.5 miles from Dahl's Food Mart. The vehicle was traveling southwest toward Linda's Court, where Johnny's body was found. So at this point, we have a clear direction of travel, and we believe Johnny's in the vehicle, who's being driven by a male with a blue shirt who could be Johnny's killer.
Investigators received the report from Johnny's autopsy.
Thanks.
The autopsy report said that Johnny suffered a gunshot wound above his right eye, and there was a .44 Magnum projectile retrieved from his jaw. He was also beaten so badly his dental bridge broke.
Next day, investigators received the report on the GPS data from Johnny's cell.
Give me those locations.
Johnny's first cell phone ping was at 3:21, which tied into the neighbor's surveillance video across the street of him leaving his neighborhood. The phone continued to ping toward the ATM and then along the route that the white SUV took to the crime scene.
At 3:38 a.m., Johnny's phone pings at Linda Court, where the 911 caller finds his body 8 hours later. But this is not the last ping.
At 4:20 a.m., there's one final ping.
Johnny Soki's phone was powered off at 4:20 around Carroll Plantation and Old Pascagoula Road, which is about 10 to 15 miles from Linda Court, where Johnny Soki's body was discovered.
We believe that this is where the suspect could have went after the crime.
Thanks. Speak. I gotta leave. Let's go.
Investigators zero in on the precise location of the final phone ping.
On October 29th, I was in the area of Old Pascagoula and Carroll Plantation Road attempting to locate Johnny Soki's cell phone when I observed a white Lincoln Aviator parked outside some apartments and was able to observe a tag number on the vehicle. I watch a black male and a white female enter the white Lincoln Aviator. At which point they exit the apartment complex and travel west on Old Pascagoula Road. I stayed at the apartment. Other investigators were able to catch up with the vehicle on Old Pascagoula Road.
It pulls into a local convenience store.
81 clear. 14 clear.
The female gets out. The driver remains in the car, drives away from the business, gets back on Old Pascagoula Road.
Investigators run the Aviator's license plate. The vehicle is registered to a Kenzie Fisher. She is the passenger inside the vehicle that detectives are surveilling.
We were able to find a relationship to that passenger of a black male with the name of Sobrante Rhodes. And we was able to identify the driver being Sobrante Rhodes. With that information, we were also able to ascertain that he had some active warrants on him.
So as I'm observing the apartment complex, the white Lincoln Aviator returns. Minutes later, a car pulls up next to the Lincoln Aviator.
White male gets out of the car, goes over to the vehicle, gets into the passenger side of the Aviator.
The white Lincoln Aviator drives out of the apartment block. They're then observed traveling just down the street to a business complex where they park in front of a business.
So we conducted a traffic stop on that vehicle. We remove Sobrante from the driver's side, and we remove the white male from the passenger side. We detain the two. From that point, we seal the vehicle, and we have it towed and impounded. We sent another unit to the convenience store, and they detained the female passenger that was dropped off. We needed to interview these 3 people to find out their whereabouts on the night of the murder.
We interviewed the passenger of the white Lincoln Aviator, Connor Moretti.
We asked Connor Moretti who Sobrante Rhodes was to him and how we knew him.
That's the first time I met him. I don't even know his name.
Did you message him or he messaged you?
I messaged him this morning, and then we arranged hookup.
Yep.
That's it.
Okay.
He expressed interest. We traded pictures.
It's interesting to see this guy had met Sobrante Rhodes on a dating app, just like Johnny Sokeys did. We asked Connor Moretti if he knew Johnny Sokeys.
Does that guy look familiar to you at all?
He messaged me one time, but I didn't respond.
He's from Venezuela?
I don't know his name.
Would it still be in your phone?
No, because
How do you know he messaged you?
I remember that face. That's just one of those faces you'll recognize.
You never messaged him back?
Nothing tight.
After a search of Connor Moretti's cell phone, we observed there was no communication between him and Johnny Sokeys on the night of the murder.
This gentleman had no involvement in the murder of Johnny Sokeys.
So we was able to mark him off the suspect list.
Next, investigators interview Sobrante's girlfriend, Kenzie Fisher.
We asked her where she was on the night of October 24th. She said she was home in her apartment.
What time do you go to sleep that night?
9:30.
Okay.
I have trouble sleeping. If he's not in the bed with me, I usually wake up.
She woken up around 2 a.m. and realized Sobrante was gone.
You got up 2:02 Friday morning. So you got up, okay, you look around, truck's gone.
And she texted him at the time to see where he was.
He was on my way. It's at 2:21.
Some time lapsed, and he was still out. At 3:53 a.m., she texted Sobrante again.
So when you sent this message at 3:53, he's not home yet.
I asked her if she suspected him of messing around outside their relationship.
I do.
What's your suspicions of that?
Having a different female.
Why do you think that?
Because he disappears in the middle of the night.
I asked her if Sobrante was seeing men outside of their relationship.
I've never
suspected him of being like that. Never given you any inclinations that he would be sexually attracted to another male.
Okay. She was quite surprised. So I showed her the surveillance footage from the ATM.
Just tell us if you recognize the person in the picture, what his name is.
It looks like Sobrante, but I can't make it out.
Yeah, see the vehicle?
Yeah, I do see the vehicle, and that does look like my vehicle.
I felt that she was upfront about her story and where she was that night. She showed us the messages that she was sending Sobrante that night, asking his whereabouts, so that confirmed her alibi. Her messages also confirmed that Sobrante Rhodes was not home on the night of the murder.
Investigators release Sobrante's girlfriend without charge.
Later that day, I interviewed Sobrante Rhodes.
Unrelated to your warrants, we want to talk to you about another case we've been investigating. Are you willing to talk to us?
Yeah, I want on the case.
Okay.
We confronted Sobrante about these dating apps. At first, he was standoffish.
Are you bisexual?
Honestly, I'm not bisexual. I have been. Yes, I'm bisexual.
Okay.
So I asked Sobrante Rhodes if he met someone by the name of Johnny on the dating app.
I met him on the chat site.
No. John who?
I don't know his last name. Big Hispanic dude.
Sobrante told us that he had picked Johnny up from his house.
Where'd you meet him at?
I met him at his house.
Okay. Did you take him anywhere?
I took him to the ATM machine.
What ATM did I go to?
On Shun, Fargo.
Wells Fargo?
I took him right back home. I wasn't gone away from my girl. No time.
So I asked Sobrante the route that they had taken.
When I went home, I went back up Airport and all the way up Shun.
All the way down Shun. You been nowhere else?
Nowhere else.
You should have been back home around 3:30, you said?
Yeah.
We knew that Sobrante was not telling the truth because we had got video surveillance from Johnny's neighbor that shows Sobrante picking Johnny up but never bringing Johnny back home. So we confronted him with that.
Let me tell you this, okay? We've got you on video going to get Johnny. Got you on video at the ATM with Johnny. Got you on the video leaving the ATM with Johnny. Y'all didn't go directly back home. Y'all went down Dawes Road.
No.
I've got you on video. We've got you on video.
I ain't killed nobody, man. I swear.
Did Johnny kill himself? Let me ask you, did Johnny kill himself?
I did not kill nobody, man. I did not take that man nowhere. Oh, God, no, I want a lawyer, man.
So Sobrante Rhodes, at that point, asked for a lawyer, and then we ceased the interview.
So at this point, the interview has stopped. The investigators have enough, at which point our office did approve a murder charge for Sobrante Rhodes.
Investigators inform the family of their progress.
Hi.
The investigators called me and told me that they found a suspect, the suspect that was driving the car that night.
What's his name?
I had never heard of Sobrante before.
Mi hija Donnie me dijo que había un sospechoso. Tuve fe en ellos que iban a resolver la situación.
I feel like it was relief for Donnie and her mom and grandmother.
It was a sigh of relief to know that this individual was off the streets, but there's still a lot of work to do. We knew Johnny died from a single gunshot wound to the head from the .44 Magnum.
Ideally, you'd have the murder weapon, you'd have anything that caused the death. We didn't have a murder weapon in this case.
Finding this weapon was going to be crucial to closing this case.
Sobrante Rhodes is now in jail, and he's communicating via email with his girlfriend. He starts talking about the gun that was used in Johnny's murder and saying that it is in the possession of someone else. I swear I didn't kill this man. When I left him, he was alive. I bet if they run the gun from that 20-year-old kid that did the shooting at Exxon Mobil in Theodore gas station the other day, it'd be a match. I don't run with this kid, but I seriously think he killed the man I'm charged with killing. I need to see someone. They got me so wrong. Sobrante Rhodes is saying that someone else was involved in this and that he did not do it.
Investigators review the case file for the shooting that Sobrante describes in his email. They discover that Mobile Police Department arrested 20-year-old Cameron Sullivan for an armed assault at an Exxon gas station 8 days after the murder of Johnny Sokes.
I contacted the case agent working the case, and he gave me the details and told me that they collected a .44 Magnum from that shooting.
The gun was then sent to the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences and tested against the bullet that was recovered from Johnny Sokes. It turned out that it was a match, and that was the gun that was used to kill Johnny Sokes.
Is Sobrante the person that killed Johnny? Or did Cameron Sullivan be Johnny's killer? We interviewed Cameron Sullivan. We asked him about the .44 Magnum.
Cameron Sullivan tells detectives that he purchased the gun recovered from the gas station shooting for $100 on October 26th, the day after Johnny's murder.
He then indicated that he had purchased the gun from Sobrante Rhodes.
Cameron Sullivan told us that he was an associate to Sobrante. We was able to ascertain a phone communication between Cameron Sullivan and Sobrante the day after Johnny Soke's murder.
Have you run his phone GPS?
The cell phone analysis of Cameron Sullivan's phone showed that he was out of state on the morning of the murder.
Thanks.
And so we knew he was not the one that killed Johnny Soke's.
Cameron Sullivan is uninvolved in Johnny's murder. Investigators charge him with no crimes in relation to the killing.
Sobrante Rhodes is trying to evade responsibility for Johnny's death. He clearly knows what happened. He's talking about the gun that was used in the murder. But now he's trying to put the gun and the shooting of Johnny on someone else.
Sobrante Rhodes' murder trial begins on May 15th, 2023. He pleads not guilty. Prosecutor Lauren Walsh sets out the chain of events that led to Johnny's murder.
I think Sobrante Rhodes was living a double, if not a triple life. He had a girlfriend who did not know where he was a lot of the time. He was with all kinds of other people she didn't know about. We know that Johnny and Sobrante were meeting up in the early morning hours of October 25th of 2019. We know that they went to the Wells Fargo ATM together, where they were seen on surveillance, and where we know Johnny Soke withdrew cash. Sobrante Rhodes did not take Johnny home after that.
I believe that he robbed him. I believe that he stole from him. And executed him. Sobrante killed Johnny Soke's for no reason at all.
We believe Sobrante Rhodes chose Linda Court to dump Johnny's body because it was quiet and secluded with no witnesses.
We know his pockets were emptied. We know his phone and his wallet were taken. We know that Johnny Soke's phone, it ultimately last connected where Sobrante Rhodes lived.
Johnny's cell phone and wallet was never recovered. We believe when we detained Sobrante and Camarate that day, Camarate could very well have been his next victim.
On May 17th, 2023, the jury finds Sobrante Rhodes guilty of intentional murder. The judge sentences him to life without parole.
When we got the verdict, I felt immense gratification and relief that we were able to secure that conviction and get justice, as well as ensure safety for our community so that the public never has to worry about Sobrante Rhodes offending like that again.
He's a very violent person, and he's right where he belongs.
The surveillance footage was immensely important in investigating this case and ultimately securing the conviction of Sobrante Rhodes. It led us to understand where Johnny Soke was, what vehicle he was in, and ultimately who he was with.
I can't understand why this happened to him.
No verlo en la casa, mirar alrededor y no ver sus risas, sus abrazos, sus besos. Todos los días de mi vida lo extraño.
Shortly after this tragedy, there was actually some good news. My wife and I found out we were pregnant too. But we weren't ever able to share that with Johnny.
He was a great person and he did not deserve that at all. And we miss him very much.
Next time on See No Evil.
Kansas City 911. Someone got stuck. Can y'all come, please?
This is a personal thing.
I shot it twice and then said, remember me, bitch.
If they go inside, we will have them at that point.
This is like the biggest nightmare I've ever had in my life.
Below is a continuous cinematic voiceover in English shaped for your title, Toronto 1993, Cold Case Solved, Family Friend Charged. I'm delivering the opening installment now in one seamless flow, keeping the pace punchy and image-rich. If you'd like, I can continue with additional installments in the same style. It begins with a locked door and a silence that felt staged. The kind of silence that knows you are listening. Toronto, winter of 1993. Snow stacked on row house steps like folded sheets in a morgue. A neighbor calls in a welfare check after lights burn all night behind frostbitten glass. Patrol knocks. No answer. A super lets them in. The hallway is thin. The smell has turned soil and metal. Kitchen chairs pushed back as if a conversation stood up and left in a hurry. The heater clicks like a distant metronome. In the bedroom, the bed is made too neatly. Across the hall, a second door. The officers share a look that says, "Don't say it." The door opens. On the carpet, a shape under a coat that does not belong to the season. A hand escapes the edge like a bookmark. The first officer breathes in. The second officer looks at the ceiling. The shape is a woman, mid-20s, no purse, no notes, no staged theatrics, just a blunt stop. The clock on the dresser is unplugged. The phone's cord is wrapped and tucked behind it like someone was tidying time. She has a name, Mia Carver. She works late. She laughs loudly in elevators. She buys oranges and leaves them in a bowl by the window because she likes the color in winter. She did not plan to die here. Homicide rolls up. Night air points a finger through the doorway. There is blood, but not enough. A restraint with its own etiquette. A blown fuse of violence followed by careful hands. The living room is orderly. The ashtray is clean. A coffee ring stamps the glass table like a single coin. Whoever came here knew the floor plan or learned it quickly. Front door locked. Back window latched. No splinters, no pry marks. The building is easy to enter if you are expected. The landlord leans in the hall and says she had people. Everyone has people. A boyfriend? No. Friends? Many. Enemies? Depends on a week. The detective, Hartley, writes down every name as if a name could bleed. The weather pushes snow under the main door, and the staircase makes a soft hiss where footsteps erase themselves. News trucks arrive before sunrise. A reporter practicing her lines says cold case under her breath as if the words are expensive, but it isn't yet. It's a brand new wound, and everyone is still telling themselves it will close. They take the body. They swab, dust, bag, log. The evidence shelf fills like a row of school portraits. Roommates drift in from night shifts. One of them, Aaron, sits with a styrofoam coffee and tells the detectives that Mia kept a circle, small but open. Study buddies, a bar crowd on Fridays, a neighbor who fixed things and never charged a cent. Family friend, technically, from the old neighborhood, name Daniel Hale. Uncle Danny to kids, though he had none of his own. He changed light bulbs for everyone. He carried groceries. He never took money. He lingered in doorways with a shy smile that didn't quite fit his face. You hear the violin bow of that detail and file it, but you don't point at it yet. The medical examiner notes bruising on the wrists. Not old, not theatrical, not practice. Time of death is the hour when shows end and the city yawns. The apartment refuses to say more. The window is a mouth shut tight. The city moves around the chalk shadow like a river around a stone. Days become weeks and grief dries into a diagram. The headlines cool. A tip line blinks with static. Someone saw a man in a heavy coat. Someone heard a soft argument. Someone read a tarot and called in the devil's card. The detectives run everything down because that is what detectives do, and still the trail goes thin. They pull phone records and get the jitter of 1993, calls that begin then bump to busy payphone ghosts, overlapping rings. They canvass the bar where Mia's friends last saw her laughing. A bartender remembers her drink, not her company. A waitress remembers the coat, not the face under it. The city does this. It remembers objects but not owners, sounds but not words. Daniel Hale drops by the station on his own, says he heard there were questions. He is tidy, hands folded, voice even. He says Mia asked him to look at a squeaky hinge last week. He says he has a toolbox that has seen more kitchens than most landlords. He says he left by 9. He says he watched a late hockey game and fell asleep in the chair. He is polite, helpful, forgettable by design. Hartley watches his eyes and sees a shutter drop when he says her name. People blink like this when grief knocks and finds no furniture. But you do not arrest a blink. You do not charge the absence of furniture. You log the quote, you save the tape, you shake the hand that will not stop trembling, and you tell yourself the tremble is weather. The years do what years do. They powder time and tuck it into the carpet seam. Evidence sits in climate control while budgets change mayors. A new detective, Jessalyn, inherits the box with Mia's name sharpied across it. She is younger than the case. She has a habit of talking to files like they are interview subjects. She listens to old tapes through noise-canceling headphones, eyes closed, index finger tapping an invisible door. The world has changed. DNA is louder now. Mixed profiles can sing where they once only whispered. A cotton swab that slept through the 90s can wake up fluent in science. Lynn sends the samples back out. She asks for a new look at skin cells that clung to the phone cord like shy barnacles. She requests analysis on a cardigan fiber that was once shrugged off as ambient. Evidence says thank you by refusing to disappear. Mia's mother, Lydia, has moved twice and still sets a place. She calls on birthdays and leaves voicemails that begin with silence because she does not trust her first word. The case is cold in press releases, not in kitchens. Cold case is a label that helps strangers measure distance. For families, it is the opposite. It is a table that never clears. Lynn meets Lydia at a bakery and scrolls gently through questions. Lydia brings a photograph where Mia is half-turning, about to laugh, eyes already mid-spark. Lynn notes that grief and hope are cousins who always arrive together. She pockets a copy of the photo the way some officers pocket a saint. The lab calls at 2:13 a.m. because big calls do that. They got something off that phone cord. It is partial, blurry, but it likes a name. Not a hit yet. A lean, a gravitational pull. It drifts toward a familiar letter pattern like a weather vane in a gust. Lynn stares at the ceiling in the lab and says softly, "Repeat it." The analyst repeats it. The pattern leans again. She orders reference swabs from everyone with a legitimate reason to have touched that phone cord 32 years ago. Officers, roommates, landlord, ex. She finds an old contact card for Daniel Hale. The address is wrong. The city has moved the streets under his feet. She tracks him through utility bills, then a union newsletter, then a fishing license. People who like water keep leaving their names by rivers. He lives in a basement apartment now, a long way from the old neighborhood, long enough that his Uncle Danny nickname has worn off around the edges. She knocks. He opens. The air behind him smells like solvents and damp laundry. He sees the badge. He shrinks and spreads at once, like ink in water. She asks if he will come down to talk. He nods. He brings nothing with him. At the table, she moves slow. No tricks, no show. She asks how he knew Mia. He delivers lines that have been folded and unfolded for 3 decades. He says he fixed her hinge and looked at the thermostat and once carried a new lamp up the stairs because she had a bad wrist from a bike fall. He does not remember a phone cord. He does not remember a coffee ring. He does not remember the coat on the floor. Memory is an unreliable witness. He takes shelter in that fact. She asks for a swab. He signs a consent form with a hand that tries not to shake and fails. The swab goes to the lab like a message in a bottle. The bottle returns with a letter inside. It says not a match yet. It says maybe. It says the partial likes him, but not enough to swear. Lynn breathes, slow. She asks the lab to reinterrogate a cardigan fiber with the new kits that speak softly to old threads. Time, it turns out, is not the enemy of evidence. Bad light is. Put it under a better bulb and the past confesses a shade more. A day later, a hinge creaks open in the data. The cardigan yields a secondary profile that leans the same direction as the chords whisper. 2 weak voices, same choir. Still, probable is not proof. This is still a ghost pressing its face to the glass. Lynn starts pulling at other strings. She re-interviews Aaron, the roommate, who confesses a lie of omission. Mia had complained once that Uncle Danny stayed too long after fixing things, that the doorway linger became a hallway step-in, that favors often keep a tab you don't see. Aaron didn't tell the police in 1993 because gratitude is a costume that hides discomfort and because women are taught to be polite even while fleeing. The note lands in Lynn's file with a weight out of proportion to its size. Meanwhile, the old audio of Daniel's voluntary interview from '93 has a detail that never fully registered. He said he left by 9. The bar tab for Mia's Friday night shows a timestamp later than 9, and a credit card receipt with a pen scratch that looks like an H someone signed for her round. Cameras back then didn't love you enough to remember your face, but registers did. Lynn pulls banking microfilm like a magician pulling scarves. A name surfaces, not his. A friend's friend who places Danny near that bar that weekend. The circle tightens without calling it that. She pays a visit to the old building super, now retired, who still keeps keys on a ring as if doorways might ask for him in a storm. He remembers the night because he remembers the smell. He also remembers that Mia had asked for her back window latch to be looked at. It sticks, he says, unless you lift and push in a particular way. A person would need to know the trick, or learn it by staying long enough to notice. He remembers demonstrating it for Danny. He's good with fixes, the super says, and the sentence can be read 2 ways if you stand just so. The arrest, when it finally comes, is as quiet as the first knock on that winter door. It does not arrive with sirens. It arrives with a breath held for 3 decades. They call it what the press will print. Toronto, 1993 cold case solved. Family friend charged. The headline moves like an aftershock down the old hallway where Snow once knelt and listened. The community shakes because betrayal wears the friendliest face. Lydia reads the line twice, then a 3rd time, then puts the paper down and stares at the bowl of oranges someone sent. She does not cry in front of cameras. She says Mia's name, and in that single word there is a house being aired out, a window being cracked, a long winter ending without the sun's permission. But solved and settled are not synonyms. The neighborhood remembers the way his footfalls used to sound on their stairs. Doors that were once opened without fear now measure the weight of a knock. This is the part that nobody prints. Justice feels like a room that is suddenly too large. It echoes. You can hear yourself in it. Lynn stands in the old bedroom and presses 2 fingers to the sill, feeling for that latch trick the super taught her. It sticks, then gives. She thinks of a coffee ring, an unplugged clock, a cardigan's whisper. She thinks of gently applied force. She thinks of how some violences are not loud but exact. In the evidence room, the boxes keep their posture. Labels turn yellow and remain legible. Cold case is a term for outsiders. Inside the tape, the temperature never drops. It is body heat and breath and the stubborn persistence of fibers. It is a mother's handset lifted on birthdays. It is a detective's insomnia that refuses to be treated. It is community shock that hardens into vigilance. The charge is only the first doorway. Beyond it are trials, appeals, calendars, words that will be tested until they creak. But something fundamental has shifted. The city exhales a fraction. The snow melts late that year, and when it does, it leaves the shape of footprints that go both directions, toward the door and away from it, reminding anyone who studies their pattern that every entrance comes with an exit, and every exit remembers the hand that closed the latch behind it. The headline ricochets through morning kitchens and subway cars and office lobbies, a metal spoon dropped onto tile that keeps ringing, and while the words look simple on the page, Toronto 1993 cold case solved, family friend charged, the city reads them like a curse unlocked, like a door finally admitting it was never quite closed. And the sound of that admission is not triumph, but a low-frequency hum of dread, because family friend is a phrase that rewires memory in an instant, flipping Polaroids face down, repainting barbecues and stairwells and borrowed tools with a varnish that does not come off. And the police podium feels the heat of lights as flashes bloom, reporters throwing lines with sharp edges. Will there be more arrests? How did this sit for 3 decades? What about the cardigan fiber? Is the DNA conclusive? And Detective Jessa Lynn stands at the microphone with the calm of a metronome and gives what she can give and withholds what must wait for a courtroom, because this is the tightrope part of the dance. The space where justice is a choreography of patience, chain of custody, lab notes written in small script with coffee stains. And as she steps away, she hears the crowd inhale on cue, the city ready to exhale only when a gavel says the word it believes will thaw the archive of winter. But that word is not promised, not today, not ever, not until each link holds in the storm. The interrogation room holds its own weather, recycled air and white noise under the door, table bolted down as if conversations might try to run, and Daniel Hale sits small in a chair that has made many men look like children, forearms resting, fingers interlaced because hands need tasks in rooms like this, eyes doing the arithmetic of exits even when there is only one, and he offers the frame he has always offered, the helpful neighbor. The family friend who saves receipts for light bulbs and buys the special tape for rattling windows, his voice unused to attention now catching on syllables as if tiny hooks were hidden in words, and the recorder's red dot watches without blinking while Lynn walks him slowly through 1993 as if guiding someone through a museum where every exhibit is a night you would rather not revisit. Here is the hallway with the wet boot marks. Here is the unplugged clock. Here is the phone with its cord wound like a patient snake. Here is a cardigan folded too neatly to be innocent, and each time the tour arrives at touch, he steps backward into fog. I do not recall. I left at 9. I watched the game. No one saw me, but I watched it. I did not go back. I did not stay long. She said thank you. She liked oranges. She laughed too loud, and I told her to be careful with the window latch or someone could let themselves in by accident, a comment that wants to sound like care but lands like a confession trying on shoes. And Lynn marks the cadence, the sudden switch from soft to sharp when she says Mia's name. The way he flinches at the mention of the coffee ring, as if some quiet part of him knows rings are records, circles that tell time when clocks lie, and she lays out the science like a set of quiet dominoes, partial profiles that lean the same direction, weak voices that harmonize, a fiber chorus that learned to sing new notes in a brighter lab, and he nods as if technicalities will save him. Words like stochastic threshold and dropout becoming driftwood for a swimmer who never learned how to float. And still, this is not confession. This is not the key turning. This is the stubborn persistence of maybe pressed against the insistence of no. Outside, the community performs shock in public and grief in private because shock is for cameras and grief belongs to kitchens where faces require no explanation. And at the corner grocery, the owner turns the headline face down after reading it twice because he was the one who used to let Danny cut in line if he had only 2 items in a toolbox. And he thinks of all the doors held and stairs climbed and wonders if kindness can be counterfeit, if a counterfeit bill can buy real bread, if the bread betrays you later. And across town, a teacher stops mid-lesson because she remembers a night when Uncle Danny tightened a loose knob on her mailbox and asked after her mother's health in a tone that was too intimate or not intimate enough, and she files that memory differently now in a drawer labeled maybe that will not stay shut. And in the same hour, Lydia Carver sits at her table and stares at the bowl of oranges someone brought after the press conference, the colors too bright, like joy wearing a costume to awake, and she whispers her daughter's name into the air, letting the vowels steady her, while in a precinct evidence room a custodian pauses by Mia's box and touches the lid with a reverence due to old books because even those who only clean around cases know when a story is woken up. Back in the room, Lynn changes tempo, not to trick him, but to loosen the rehearsal. She asks about the hinge, about the thermostat, about the way you learn a person's schedule by accident when you care for a building, morning class, late shift, Friday drinks, Saturday errands, and his answers arrive without pauses that would suggest invention, the kind of fluency that comes from long familiarity. And that fluency makes the room tilt, because knowledge can be nurture or it can be surveillance dressed as favor. And beneath the table, his foot knocks once against the metal leg when she says there were complaints, small ones, unreported, that you stayed too long and stood too close and preferred to fix things at night. And he closes his eyes as if he could walk into the dark behind them and lock the door. And she waits, not hunting the dramatic confession, not believing in television miracles, just trusting in silence as a tool that measures distance. Because real admissions often smell like lowest tide, not like thunder. The lab delivers another whisper, not a shout, but a new alignment. Trace skin from the inside lip of a mug recovered from the sink that night, once too faint, now legible enough to be used in a sentence with caution. And the analyst's voice is careful on the phone because care is part of the oath. We have corroboration. We still have caveats. The numbers are not fireworks, but they are not fog. And in a prosecutor's office, a whiteboard gets reorganized, headings rewritten with a thicker marker, witness list reshuffled so the early voices build a walkway toward the hard questions, and discovery rules begin their stern march. Copies prepared, dates negotiated, a calendar becoming a skeleton for narratives that will be fleshed in front of strangers seated in rows. Media keeps asking for a motive, as if motive were a coin you find under the sofa, as if it would click neatly into a slot and light up the answer board. But people are messier than puzzles, and sometimes the only motive is proximity plus opportunity braided with entitlement, a rope that looks like courtesy from a distance, and the audience at home performs its ritual, posting comments under articles with words like monster and how and never again, until the next headline pulls their attention in a different direction. But the circle around Mia remains small and tight and focused, their shock calcifying into resolve, their whisper network becoming a chorus that sings, "We knew something felt off. We said nothing because we are trained to. We will not make that mistake again." And in that choir is the seed of prevention the posters never mention. Trial prep is an ocean with currents you cannot see, and Lynn knows the case will be attacked at every seam. Is the DNA strong enough? Are the fibers unique enough? Are the interviews clean? Are the chain links unbroken? And she spends late nights with transcripts, listening for ordinary words that can be dragged into ambiguity, knowing that defense is a duty and doubt is the instrument, while she rehearses her own instrument, a baton made of facts, not feelings, even though feelings run under everything like a live wire. And on one of those nights, she finds an unnoticed motif on the 1993 tape, a throat clear before Danny says 9 o'clock, a tiny stall, the sort people use when trying on a time for fit. And the next morning, she and the analyst sit with a timeline and lay transparent sheets over it, bar receipts, neighbor statements, TV schedules, and a sports stat page that says the game ran late due to a second period injury timeout, stretching the broadcast beyond the hour he used as shelter. And coincidence is a weak beam, but a beam is still a support when the structure needs one, and so they add it to the architecture. Meanwhile, another door opens. A woman from the old building who moved away years ago calls the tip line because headlines turned her stomach like a train taking a curve too fast, and she says, "He fixed my blinds and asked if I ever felt unsafe with my window latch and said he could show me a trick and stood too close and left too slow, and I told myself thank him he means well because that is the spell we are taught," she says. And I want the record to show the spell now that I hear its tune, and her statement is not a revelation, but it is a harmony. And harmonies fill rooms, and the room they are building must be filled with enough sound to be heard over the defense's orchestra. Lydia's asked if she wants to speak at sentencing one day, and she says, "I will speak when there is something to speak at and not before, because hope is a leash that can choke if you pull against it." And she practices a different ritual, keeping her daughter large in memories, refusing to let crime be the last adjective attached to Mia's name, talking about the oranges and the elevator laugh and the way she kept candy in her coat pocket for children who hated waiting for buses. And in that curation is resistance, the insistence that victim is a role, not a personality, a chapter, not a biography. The city adjusts, as cities do after colliding with a truth that was present all along, people adding deadbolts and learning window songs and checking the tone on favors offered. And some resist the paranoia and some lean into it. And somewhere in between is a new normal built from the shock that lingers like a bruise, soft to the touch months after the impact, while the case file, once cold by headline and warm by heart, is now hot by both. Set on a table in a room with a view of the courthouse dome where pigeons circle as if orbiting a planet that only understands gravity, not morality. And Lynn stands by the window and lets the city sound wash over her. Buses hissing, sirens threading, laughter rising from a patio where a couple argues with friendly heat, and she thinks of the latch trick again, the way knowledge can be a key or a crowbar, and she vows to keep teaching doors to tell her who passed and when, because this is the work. Not only to name the past, but to instruct the future, to translate Cold Case into Never Again with fewer footnotes. The courthouse corridors hum like power lines on a damp day as pretrial motions begin to braid the narrative into something a jury can hold, and the phrase cold case turns into a technical ecosystem of affidavits, lab protocols, chain of custody maps, every box stickered and countersigned until ink itself feels like a witness, and Detective Jessa Lynn walks it all again in her head, the hinge, the thermostat, the unplugged clock, the phone cord that kept a small, stubborn memory of touch. The cardigan fiber that decided after decades to stop being shy. And she thinks about how time does not heal so much as reveal, how dust can be a diary if you read it under the right lamp. Then she thinks of Mia's oranges on a winter sill and makes herself promise that the trial will not erase the person to spotlight the puzzle, because a puzzle solved without a person remembered is another kind of failure that dresses like victory. Reporters loiter by the curb and practice lines into their microphones, the cadence of scandal tuned to the hour, and they shape the story with phrases designed to click in living rooms. Family friend charged, betrayal at the heart of a neighborhood, DNA whisper becomes courtroom shout, while producers in vans splice archival footage of snowy stoops and yellow tape, and the city swallows the package because cities must metabolize shock or choke on it. And in the swallowing there is forgetting, and the forgetting is why detectives build indexes and mothers build altars on small kitchen shelves. The defense files a motion to exclude the mug rim and the cardigan fiber, citing probabilities that confuse even the mathematicians, and a hearing blooms under fluorescent lights where a lab analyst speaks like a careful violin, and a defense expert counters with the confidence of a marching band, and the judge takes notes in a handwriting that looks like winter branches. And at the end of a long morning, the ruling arrives with the gravity of a door hinge settling, admissible with limitations, context required, interpretation to be fought meter by meter in front of the 12 strangers whose job will be to translate fog into a verdict. And the hallway exhales in a staggered rhythm as both sides text their teams and call their mothers and pat the pockets that hold their pens. Meanwhile, Lynn returns to the apartment building not because she expects the wall to speak, but because rooms remember body language even when evidence is boxed. And she stands where the coffee ring once circled on glass and imagines the sequence. A knock that was not a knock because familiarity unlocks bolts. A favor that was not a favor but a rehearsal. A voice that sounded like help and felt like gravity. And she feels the air gather in her throat and forces herself to breathe because breathing is part of the job too. And downstairs she meets the new super and explains why she needs to go on the roof. And on the roof, Toronto spreads in winter steel and water, each window a small narrative. And she looks down the line of fire escapes and thinks about the back window latch trick again. The choreography of lift, then push, then slide, and how knowledge can be kindness or key depending on the hand that holds it. In Discovery, a new photograph surfaces from a roommate's storage bin, a party snapshot from the week before, out of focus but generous with hints. Mia mid-laugh, a hand at the edge that is not hers and not Aaron's, a wristwatch with a scratch on the face that looks like a comma, and Lynn pairs it with a time card from a hardware store that shows Daniel Hale paid cash for sandpaper in a small file that same afternoon. And while tools are not sins and scratches are not signatures, the collage tightens the frame in a way that makes the defense scribble notes with fresh urgency, challenging work orders, proposing alternate hands, pointing to the entire neighborhood of helpers who own toolboxes. And in that spray of possible, some jurors will hear reason and some will hear foghorns arguing with lighthouses. The city's talk shows host panels, experts on body language, experts on statistics, experts on why people ignore their instincts around those dubbed helpful, and callers tell small stories that taste like big ones. He walked me home once and I told myself it was safe because he was known. He stayed in my kitchen after fixing the sink and I hugged him because gratitude is the script, and only later did the script feel wrong. And in these confessions, there is a collective unlearning, a dawning that courtesy can be counterfeit, that a smile can be a mask, and this unlearning is itself a civic act more important than ratings, even if ratings ride it like a parade float. Lydia avoids the cameras and walks early by the lake when mist clings low and geese draw lines through it like pens on postcards, and sometimes she speaks to her daughter by naming the mundane, the bus routes you once took, the thrift store where you loved a ridiculous coat, the way winter light looked on your oranges, and she never asks why, because why is a trap that closes on ankles and will not open. She asks only that the city keep loving the living with more skill than it loved her child that night, and in that ask is both mercy and indictment. Pretrial interviews expand the map, and one voice returns from the early days, a neighbor who moved out and moved on, who now says a memory unthawed when she read the phrase "cold case solved with family friend charged," a faint trace of aftershave in the hall the night Mia died, a rubber doorstop wedged in a fire door that usually never stayed open, a small thing, a practical aid, but also a corridor invitation. And the detail is not a fingerprint, but it is a turnstile that lets another inference pass, and Lynn adds it to the outline with the humility of a carpenter adding a screw, knowing plates shift under any building that pretends to be finished. The prosecutor visits the apartment with Lynn and stands where the unplugged clock once sat and asks why would someone unplug a clock, and Lynn says to kill alibis that rely on television times, or to stop the room from telling the hour later, or because noise irritated a man who needed silence to listen for neighbors while he disciplined his own heartbeat, or simply because he was practicing a tidy grief to perform later. Every answer ugly, every answer plausible. And the prosecutor writes nothing because this cannot go in. Only the fact of the plug can go in, and courts do not convict on poetry, even when poetry is truer than statistics on some nights. Defense investigators knock on doors and gather alternate versions, a shadow on a stair that was not Danny but a courier, a repair ticket for a second-floor neighbor's fridge that could explain tool bag sightings, a bar manager who resents the way police rummaged his old ledgers and now recants nuances he once offered freely, and every subtraction finds an addition across town. A waitress who remembers the coat color after all, a cabbie who notes 2 drop-offs on the same block within an hour, one fair chatterbox, one fair quiet as snow, and the net effect is motion sickness for anyone who believes narratives should be straight lines. But life is not a straight line, it is a spool, and the work is to find the thread that holds while cutting away the knots that lie. Lynn, sleepless more than she admits, sits at her kitchen table and arranges index cards as if shuffling a deck with a ghost dealer, and she writes short, blunt fragments on each to keep from hypnotizing herself with eloquence, fiber on cardigan, touch on cord, hinge instruction, window trick, unsolicited linger, a coffee ring, a clock dead, a mug rim, a scratch like a comma, a rubber doorstop, a hallway smell. And when she steps back, the wall is not a conspiracy chart. It is a topography of simple incidents that rhyme, and rhymes, she knows, are not proof, but they are how the ear finds the melody and noise. The day bail is argued, the courtroom holds its breath like a swimmer, and the defense paints community ties in careful strokes. The union shifts, the caregiving for an elderly neighbor, the absence of record, the volunteer work fixing ramps at a church where screws squeak in summer, and the Crown paints risk with equally careful strokes, the gravity of the charge, the newly aligning science, the lived pattern of proximity seeking, the old tape where time wobbled, and the judge, weighing rain against granite, chooses caution, and Daniel Hale returns to a cell that shrinks or grows depending on your guilt and your imagination. And that night the city sleeps unevenly, some convinced the case is solved, others convinced it is merely arranged toward a solution that will be broken by a clever cross. And in that division there is democracy, messy and necessary. A small letter arrives at the precinct with no return address and handwriting that leans forward like it is in a hurry to leave the page. It says, "I remember a night in '93 when he told me to keep my windows locked because men look in when they see oranges on a sill. And I laughed then, and now I am not laughing, and it is unsigned, and it cannot be used, but it can be felt, and Lynn feels it, the way a violin feels a fingertip, a pressure note in a song she already knows how to play. And the feeling is not derailing, it is guiding, a whisper that finds an echo in other whispers gathered legally." And she files the letter in a folder labeled context and keeps moving. The city begins to teach itself new manners, neighbors learning to say no to favors that demand an audience, landlords posting latch instructions in public so secrets become public knowledge rather than private leverage, bars deciding to comp drinks differently so receipts do not perform time tricks. And in these micro changes, the headline cold case begins to broaden into a civic case, not of guilt alone, but of habit, and habits are the long game that outlive trials. In the corridor outside evidence, a new recruit asks Lynn whether the unplugged clock still bothers her, and she says yes, it does, because it is the most honest object in the room. It tells the truth by refusing to speak. It is a reminder that some details are not clues, but character notes, and character is what jurors use when evidence asks for interpretation, and the recruit nods like someone who just opened a tool drawer and found instruments they do not yet know how to use. Pre-trial lingers, as pre-trial does, and the city keeps grinding its ordinary gears, and yet the air holds a new mixture of caution and resolve, people carrying themselves with a small kindness sharper than before, the kind that does not apologize for setting boundaries, and somewhere a bowl of oranges brightens a winter window for no one in particular, and somewhere else a detective opens a file that has waited 20 years to be called urgent and hears the docket whisper, the old headline into a future tense, cold case today, not tomorrow, not someday, now. And the work continues, and the work is the point. The calendar inches toward trial with the stubbornness of a rusted hinge, and every day in the precinct feels like a dress rehearsal where no one can afford to miss a cue. And Detective Jessalyn keeps pacing that narrow runway between evidence and story, reminding herself that facts are not a novel, yet also knowing that jurors do not hear in spreadsheets. They hear in human breath. So she spends mornings with analysts and afternoons with witnesses and nights with the empty air of Mia's old room, letting the silence edit her questions, cutting anything that sounds like theater, sharpening everything that sounds like weather, because weather is what you live inside even when you stop noticing it. And this case has always been weather, the damp that seeped into wood frames for 32 years until the structure realized it was not merely creaking, it was confessing. The Crown assembles exhibits that look ordinary until their adjacency turns them into a chorus, a mug, a cardigan thread, a phone cord, a clock with no heartbeat, a coffee ring that prints a secret calendar, a rubber doorstop that transformed a locked floor into an invitation, and Lynn imagines the jurors' faces as each item appears under the document camera, each object honest to the point of boredom until a sentence links it to a room and a time, and then it becomes evidence, which is another word for memory that many people can agree upon. And she knows the defense will try to unbraid that agreement with a comb built from doubt, and she respects the comb because respect is a discipline that keeps you from underestimating someone who will try to find your floorboards. The defense team works their own weather, assembling alternate drafts of 1993 that center on other hands, other shadows, other schedules, and their investigator knocks on a door 3 cities away to find a former building courier who remembers the smell of fresh paint on the 3rd floor that week and a rolling tool case left near a stairwell by someone who was not the defendant, and that thread is not a rope, but it is a thing you can hold if you are unwilling to drown. And the city's opinion splits along the usual seams. Some say this is simple and late and sad. Some say this is complicated and rushed and misread. And under those arguments is a quieter math practiced at kitchen tables where mothers and daughters speak to each other with the kind of candor the internet never earns. Lydia Carver spends less time by the lake now and more at her sister's apartment, where the kettle understands the timing of her grief, and she is learning the posture of a witness who may one day look at a man and describe the absence he authored, and she practices not for a microphone but for the shape of a sentence that will hold without breaking, and sometimes she finds herself rehearsing to apples at the grocery because fruit obeys gravity, and gravity is the only law that has never let her down, and when she sees oranges, she does not cry. She thinks of her daughter's stubborn joy, of color chosen against season, of small rebellions that add up to a life. Lynn runs one more audit on chain of custody, not because she doubts her team, but because ritual is how you honor the dead, and she traces each item from hand to hand, using her fingertip as a pointer on the page, and she stops only when she reaches her own name. Because you cannot lead a procession you have not walked. And then she does something that looks like superstition, but is actually pedagogy. She gathers the rookies and tells them, this is how you handle a cold case that refuses to stay quiet. You do the paperwork as if it sings. You speak to boxes as if they are choir practice. You ignore the cameras. You refuse the easy adjective, and you never make a promise that belongs to a jury. And the rookies nod, like people who feel the ground rising to meet them. The prosecutor requests a courtroom technology check, and the screen hums to life like a low drone, and images of old photographs and newly scanned ledgers flicker into modern light, and techs fuss with cables that seem determined to doubt their own purpose. And Lynn stands at the back and imagines the 12 faces who will sit there and calibrate their skepticism against each frequency the case emits. And she resists the urge to populate those chairs with empathy she chooses not to feel. Because while empathy is the engine of her private hours, discipline must be the engine at work. And what the job needs most today is an absence of melodrama that can be mistaken for arrogance. A boring competence that does not belong on television but does belong on the scales. The defendant's counsel files a motion regarding the jury pool, citing media saturation and headlines with phrases like cold case and family friend that they argue will smear neutral minds with the sticky residue of foregone conclusions. And a hearing unfolds where sociologists and statisticians take the stand and talk about prejudice as if it were pollen in the air, measurable but inevitable, and the judge orders careful voir dire, extended if necessary, and the city feels its breath being counted, in then out. Ready or not, your opinions will be weighed for fitness. A detail that had seemed closed reopens with a soft click. A technician in storage reviews all old negatives as a side project and notices on frame 34 the suggestion of an elbow in a mirror beyond the scene tape, likely a first responder at the edge of the room, but the angle also offers the rim of an ashtray pushed too far under the couch to be accidental, and the technician flags this not because it is dramatic but because it is slightly wrong, and wrongness is the original scent detector in any hunt. And when Lynn revisits the inventory, she notices the ashtray was indeed logged, empty and clean, but the location was described as table, not floor, and while that discrepancy may be nothing more than fatigue, it is also a chance to ask if someone arranged the room before the first crisp photographs were taken, someone who knew how to tidy a scene without cleaning it, someone who preferred the theater of neatness to the honesty of chaos. And the thought slides into place like a pane of glass, not proof, not even inference, just a lens that might sharpen the next look. Another voice calls the tip line, a janitor who worked in the building across the alley in the 90s and remembers a back stair that people used when they wished to avoid the main hall, and he says he once held the door for the helpful neighbor carrying a lamp up the service steps because the man said the front buzzer was tricky and his hands were full, and this is nothing on its own. Yet its texture matches the case, the tendency towards side doors and favors that need an audience. And Lynn adds it to the wall at the lowest corner where small facts sit like stones keeping the poster straight. Trial month arrives on a gray morning that pretends not to care about headlines, and the courthouse exterior is a choir of coats and lenses and portable lights. And inside, the benches fill with the kind of silence that aches, and voir dire begins with the ritual questions. Can you be fair? Can you set aside what you have read or heard? Can you look at a mother and not rush to repair her life with a verdict? Can you look at a defendant and not rush to assign him to a story you like better than the truth? And some people say yes too quickly and are excused for confidence. That sounds like denial. And some people falter and are excused for being honest before they were asked to be heroic. And after days that feel like months, a panel is seated, 12 and 2, faces that resisted the gravity of certainty long enough to be trusted to speak when the weight finally lands. Opening statements bloom like careful fires, the Crown painting a map you can walk, and the defense painting a fog you must respect or be lost. And neither is wrong about this as a philosophy, because truth has always been a trail through weather, and the first witness is the woman who found the silence staged in 1993, the neighbor whose call unlatched the next 32 years. And she tells the simple story of lights left on and a feeling in her throat that knew more than her mind did, and the jurors watch her hands more than her face, because hands keep their own minutes. And her hands say, I have held this worry so long, it is a posture now. And then the paramedic speaks, and then the medical examiner, and then the first detective, an older man now who wears his regret like a tie too tight, and he admits to the time's limitations with a humility that helps and hurts at once, because humility is beautiful and also a sharpened instrument when the defense seeks to cut. Evidence appears like constellations projected onto courtroom walls, each star a small light that matters because of pattern, and the cardigan fiber makes its debut not as magic but as method, a lesson in how insignificant things become significant because of persistence and better instruments. And the defense cross is precise and relentless. How many fibers in an apartment? How many on a bus seat? How many on a couch where friends lean on friends? And the analyst's answers are precise and relentless in return, speaking not in absolutes but in probabilities that add up when you respect them. A staircase whose steps are shallow enough to climb without breathlessness if you allow yourself the pace. The phone cord whisper is next, presented with caveats printed in bold on the screen, partials that align, voices that rhyme but do not solo, and the defense does not need to do much here, beyond. Remind everyone that rhymes can be coincidence, that the human brain is an addict for pattern and will overpay for it. And Lynn watches jurors write notes and wonders what words they choose for maybe, for lean, for harmonize, for suggestive, for caution, for listen again. Then comes a witness nobody expected to be this steady, the old building super who still carries keys in retirement, and he speaks of the latch trick with a clarity that makes the room feel smaller, lift, push, slide, the way knowledge wears the face of care sometimes, and the way care can conceal the arrogance of trespass. And he says he showed the trick to many residents over the years, but he remembers showing it to the defendant because the man liked to learn how things worked. And the defense nods like, yes, of course, my client helps everyone. We have never denied it. And in that nod, you can sense the wire the jury must walk between helpful and hungry. Lydia sits through it with a straight spine that the city could use as a bridge, and when she steps out between sessions, she breathes the courtyard air the way divers breathe after a long descent, and cameras hush around her because hushing is the only courtesy they have left, and occasionally a stranger touches her elbow without speaking, and that is the second to last human language. Midway through the week, an old audio clip is played for the room, the 1993 voluntary interview where the defendant said 9 o'clock and you can hear the throat clear before the time appears, a hiccup that is nothing by itself and something in the company it keeps. And the defense asks if nerves can make anyone cough, and the analyst says yes, and the defense asks if those who are innocent clear their throats, and the analyst says yes, and yet the sound remains in the room after the answer has left, like a draft that reminds you a window is not fully closed. Cross-examinations chew at edges as they must, and Lynn keeps her notes orderly and her face unreadable and her faith modest, because modest faith is the only faith that can survive this machine. And at night, she returns to her apartment and sits without lights and listens to the city move the way it always has. Buses like soft drums, sirens like violin strings, children like fountains in courtyards where sleep is a rumor, and she repeats the names of victims from other winter rooms who will never have a courtroom day, and she tells them quietly that this one is for them too, and in that private litany there is a vow that no headline could print without embarrassing itself. On Friday afternoon, the judge adjourns for the weekend, and the people spill onto stone steps that have carried grief up and down for a century, and the defendant is led away in a choreography that pretends to be mundane, and the jurors walk in twos as if pairing could dilute the concentration of what they have heard. And the sky over Toronto performs that cool metallic glow the lake sometimes sends inland, and the headline writers go back to their desks and choose words that remember cold case without closing the door on the word charged, because charged is not convicted, and convicted is not healed, and healed is not forgotten. And the community goes home to their ordinary rooms knowing that ordinary rooms can be anything but. And Jessalyn returns to the apartment that started all of this and stands at the sill, fingers on the latch, feeling for the way lift becomes push, becomes slide. And she does not open the window. She simply listens to its story of friction and design, a story about knowledge that insists on being ethical or it becomes a weapon. And she vows to keep speaking that lesson into rooms that still think kindness is never dangerous. And then she walks down the stairs slowly, counting each step, because counting steps is a way to tell yourself you are not falling. Week 2 on the calendar opens like a locker that has memorized a combination, a click, a lift, a swing, and the courtroom inhales the routine without admitting it is ritual. And Detective Jesselyn feels the weight of continuity settle on her shoulders the way a coat does in late autumn, familiar and heavier than you remember. And the Crown begins with housekeeping that is not housework, foundation witnesses and lab custodians and clerks who shepherded boxes through decades, each voice stitching another seam in the blanket the jury will be asked to sleep under, and then a quiet surprise arrives in the form of a microfilm librarian from a hospital basement, a guardian of thin ghosts who testifies to the long shelf life of the ordinary. And she produces an emergency room log from the week of Mia's death, a paper ribbon that doctors signed as if time itself required a co-signer, and there it is in ink that has refused to fade. A late-night entry for a hand laceration on a man who gave a name that was not Danny and an address that never existed, treated and released, a shallow cut at the base of the thumb, consistent with a slip against a metal edge, could be a toolbox, could be a window latch. And the room does that thing rooms do when a new instrument joins the band. It does not cheer. It leans forward, and the defense stands and asks about identification, and the librarian shrugs the way truth sometimes shrugs. We recorded what we recorded. Names can wear costumes, signatures can lie, but the timestamp is the timestamp and the cut is the cut. And jurors glance down at their hands as if their palms might remember a night they never lived. The Crown pairs the log with a pharmacist's testimony, a sale of butterfly closures and antiseptic pads 2 days later to a man who paid cash and left quickly, and the camera captures the way the defendant refuses to look at the exhibit screen, a refusal that means nothing inside the rules and too much outside them. And Lynn writes another index card in her pocket shorthand, cut hand week of fake name, cash, quick exit, and she resists the urge to feel momentum as fate. She calls it what it is, accumulation. And accumulation is the only honest magic in this job. The defense invites the world to sympathize with coincidences, that cuts are common and cash is unremarkable and running errands fast is a civic virtue when you live a life of helping. And they remind the jury that a cold case can seduce investigators into seeing constellations where there are only stars, and they pull a courier to the stand who says he bled on stairwells that year from moving broken glass and could have been the man in the log if you squint. And the point is not to persuade fully. The point is to make persuasion cruelly expensive, to price certainty beyond reach with small coins of reasonable doubt. And Lynn writes another card, courier blood, stairwell, maybe, and keeps going because a wall is built even if it must accept some ivy. A digital archivist testifies next, a specialist who can fetch ghosts from tapes that were thought dead, and he presents a reconstruction of the television broadcast on the night the defendant said 9, a hockey game that ran late due to an injury timeout that pushed the local news beyond the top of hour. And he plays a clip of the anchor starting at a time the defendant swore he was home watching a different show, and again, this is not a nail. It is a sound in the attic that returns, and the defense responds with the obvious. Channels are many, memory is faulty. The past is a maze that we misremember to make navigation possible, and the jurors write more notes, and the bench calendar turns a page without asking permission. The super returns briefly to clarify the latch trick, the angle of lift that saves a fingertip from a shallow bite, and a diagram appears on the screen with arrows that look like choreography. And in the back row, a young officer copies it into a notebook the way a music student copies scales, because technique outlives cases, and Lynn thinks of every building in the city that hides one trick like this per floor, and wonders how many tricks someone learned because kindness granted a tutorial. A new witness steps in, the triage nurse from that long-ago night summoned through a string of phone calls and luck, and she remembers the man because he would not remove his jacket even when asked, as if sleeves were a secret. And she remembers he insisted on being called sir, in a way that was too strong or too weak, and she remembers the cut looked like a sentence that stopped too soon, jagged and impatient, and the defense raises an eyebrow that translates to unreliable memory, and the judge reminds the room to hold judgments like eggs, gently and with both hands, and the nurse steps down as if leaving a small gift you cannot unwrap yet. Outside the courthouse, a winter drizzle sheets the lenses, and the headlines keep their appetite. Cold case gains steam. Family friend's hand injury surfaces. Timeline wobble widens, and the city does its ritual of arguing at crosswalks and gas pumps, some announcing this is open and shut at last, others insisting open and shut is a fairy tale told to calm children at night, and Lydia walks past a newsstand without turning her head, and buys bread from a bakery where the owner has decided to keep a small vase of bright fruit on the counter in Mia's quiet honor. And the choice is not announced, it is lived, and in such choices a neighborhood learns how to remain one. In a side room, the defense runs a demonstration with a mock latch, and on cross, They make a point that you can catch the skin if you do the motion wrong, and wrong is easy when late and cold and angry, and they invite the jury to imagine every possible way a hand can bleed without committing a crime. And the invitation is real because the human body has infinite methods for betraying itself, and Lynn notes how the demonstration feels like a coin tossed into a fountain, a plea wrapped as mechanics, and she files it under watch your verbs. The next day, the Crown introduces an audio puzzle, the background track on a neighbor's voicemail from the week before the murder where Mia is heard laughing and then saying, "Do not stay too long," and because the machine recorded over itself, the clip is chopped into small islands of sound, but islands have shapes that suggest continents, and an audio engineer walks the jury through the waveform like a coastline, and the defense asks how many laughs sound the same at midnight in an apartment hallway, and the answer is too many to count. And yet the courtroom keeps the sound in its bones after the witness leaves, a vibration more than a fact. And Lynn glances at the jurors and sees a woman touch the base of her throat, the way people do when they feel a note, not an argument. Chain of custody is questioned again, as it should be, as it must be, and the Crown answers again with paper and ink and stamps and signatures. And nobody claps for the ordinary, but the ordinary is what catches those who fall through the spectacular. And in the hallway, a rookie from another unit asks Lynn if she ever gets used to the grind, and Lynn says, "You do not get used to it, you become it," and that is both the warning and the point. The defense calls a character witness, a priest who runs a ramp building program where the defendant volunteered, and he speaks in a tired kindness that makes the room want to forgive someone, anyone. And he does not excuse, he illuminates. The man showed up when asked. The man knew how to lift together rather than alone. The man stayed late when screws squeaked, and the Crown has no interest in humiliating goodness, so they simply ask if goodness can coexist with harm, and the priest says yes, and the jury hears an honesty that adds gravity rather than levity to the moment, because complexity does that. It weighs, it does not float. Late in the week, Lynn presents a small sequence she has been saving, a series of stills from the apartment shot where a reflection in a picture frame suggests two bodies moving, one close, one angled away, the way a helper might drift toward an exit at the sound of a conversation ending, and the defense says shadows lie, and she agrees silently, but shadows also testify when no one else will, and she lets the images sit on the screen long enough for the jury to register the posture of a room that knows who is at ease and who is not. The judge keeps the tempo, the courtroom orchestra obeying the baton of schedule and statute, and Friday arrives the way trains do, on time and heavy, and the Crown signals the end of their case is near. 2 more witnesses, and the scaffolding is complete, and the defense prepares to climb it with every tool doubt has ever invented. And that night, Lynn returns to the old building with permission and stands on the service stair where the janitor once held the door, and she listens to the echo that staircases make when people think they are alone. And she tests the rubber doorstop pattern with one of her own, and she watches how the door stops 1 inch short of closing, and how 1 inch is all an opportunist needs, and she writes another card that simply says 1 inch and slips it in her pocket with the others. A deck that feels less like gambling and more like weather reports folded into a small wallet. The city sleeps, some lightly, some hard, and in a basement apartment across town, a man stares at a ceiling he cannot explain to himself anymore. And in a kitchen, a mother adjusts a bowl of oranges and leaves one on the sill as if repeating a word until it loses its sting. And in a precinct, a detective files the day's notes and switches off a light. And in the courthouse, a clock ticks toward Monday without caring who wins the argument, because clocks keep their own counsel even when someone once tried to silence one. And the headline writers close their laptops, and the portable lights cool down, and the rain stops as if someone finally remembered the sky has other things to do. And the case remains what it has always been, a cold case made hot by attention and warmed by competence until it either sustains its own heat or dies back into fog, and Jessa Lynn refuses to guess which. She refuses prophecy, she respects process, she breathes, she sleeps. She waits for the next door to ask to be opened. The defense opens their case on a Tuesday that smells like copier toner and wet wool, and they begin the way careful surgeons begin, by washing their hands in front of everyone, telling the jury they respect the investigation and the grief and the work, and then asking the room to accept that respect is not the same as surrender, that doubt is not disrespect, but duty. And a man with the kind of voice that sells insurance in better times steps forward to explain transfer and commingling and the promiscuous habits of fibers, and he sprinkles the words secondary and tertiary and stochastic as if they were common salt. And he points to how a cardigan in a shared space can become a carrier for the city, and how a phone cord can capture memories from many hands without choosing a favorite. And he gives case studies that feel like parables where evidence learned to tell a different story under a brighter lamp. And the jurors stay disciplined, pens moving, faces careful, because this is the task they were chosen for, to let logic do its slow work even while the human heart tries to sprint toward relief. Next, a former tenant from 2 floors down testifies about a maintenance man who vanished that year, and a cousin who boasted, and a boyfriend who shouted, and an argument she heard through ventilation at 2 in the morning, and each name she offers is a shadow that walks past the window of 1993, and the defense asks the room to notice how many possible culprits lived inside one staircase, and Lynn does not roll her eyes because she knows this is true. Buildings hold multitudes, and not all of them are benign, and even now, years later, the stairwell could resound with footsteps that never introduced themselves. And the Crown does not try to erase the crowd. They try to shape it. They cross with a steady metronome, dates and distances, and times checked against records. The vanished man who actually took a job in a different city, the cousin who drank and bragged about everything except violence, the boyfriend documented at a bus depot on the wrong side of town, and the jurors make new notes and remove none of the old ones, and the lattice of maybe grows tighter without snapping. The defense then calls a scientist whose specialty is caution, a soft-spoken woman who wears patience like a scarf, and she offers what she calls alternative frameworks for the data, ways to think about partial profiles that lean but do not shout, ways to hear the harmony without presuming a soloist, and she refuses to be sensational, and that refusal is powerful. The jury leans closer because she is not selling anything. She is warning them about the cheapness of certainty in a world that wants bargains. And when the Crown crosses, they thank her for her caution and then ask her to walk the jury through the sum, not the pieces, the combination of cord and cardigan and mug and timing and behavior and the observation of proximity that someone called kindness, but the room is invited to consider a different word for. And the scientist admits that in aggregate, the architecture looks persuasive even if no single column can carry the roof alone. And that admission lands like a small stone in a bowl, not loud but resonant. The defendant does not take the stand, and this is his right, and the judge reminds the jury not to read tea leaves in a cup they are not allowed to hold, and the silence where his voice would be feels like a held breath. And into that breath, the defense sends character witnesses, a neighbor whose dog adored him, a coworker who learned the art of the neat toolbox from him, the priest again with smaller stories about kindness that made ramps possible in winters when ice pretended to be the ground. And the Crown does not try to puncture kindness with a pin. They leave it intact and ask instead whether kindness can travel with possession, whether the same hands that hold a screw can hold a wrist, whether generosity can be the language a predator learns early because thank you is easier to say than help. And the priest does not fight the question. He nods, and the nod is a bridge the jury is allowed to cross if it chooses. A midweek motion erupts about the emergency room log, chain versus recollection, pen strokes versus memory, and the judge chooses the pen and lets the recollection ride as context, not conclusion, and the defense looks as if a balloon has lost some air but not the string around their finger, and they pivot to a courier who brings in a load of reasonable doubt about the building's service stair and the traffic of strangers. And Lynn sits with hands folded and watches the courier demonstrate the way a rubber doorstop can leave a door mostly closed but generous, and she remembers her own index card that says 1 inch. And she feels the phrase move around the room as if air itself had a caption. In a quiet moment between witnesses, the court plays a brief excerpt of the 1993 inventory note where a table is listed and an ashtray is said to be on it. And then the technician shows the re-examined negative where the ashtray lip hides under a couch edge like a turtle in sand. And the defense suggests fatigue, error, human margin, and the Crown suggests rearrangement and rehearsal and the possibility that the room had not been left neutral by the hands that ended the night. And jurors watch the two possibilities tug like children at opposite ends of a rope. And nobody falls and nothing breaks, and still the tug leaves a mark. Outside, the city keeps learning new manners. Landlords send emails to tenants explaining latch quirks and safety checks and how to ask for help without debt. Bars post signs about receipt protocols that keep time honest while still letting generosity live. Neighborhood groups swap lists of vetted volunteers and agree on bright-line rules for stepping into each other's rooms. And none of this is loud enough to trend, but it is the best part of the story. The part where Cold Case stops being only a headline and becomes a change in how a block teaches itself to survive. Lydia walks past the courthouse fountain each morning and refuses to throw a coin. She keeps her wishes in her mouth where they cannot be photographed, and sometimes a passerby reaches out as if to steady her, and she steadies them instead, with a look that is not unkind but firm. A look that says, we will all live through this, and we will do it without collapsing into the comfort of spectacle. And in the afternoons, she sits in the back row and watches men argue about fibers and timing and the physics of doors. And she wonders again how ordinary the architecture of harm can be, how easily it borrows the language of courtesy, how deftly it moves under fluorescent lights without needing to run. The defense rests after a witness who is not helpful and knows it, a former coworker from years later who tries to be loyal and only manages to be vague, and the judge calls the jurors by number and dismisses them for the day with instructions that are old and have never lost their shine. Do not discuss, do not research, do not let questions rust into opinions. Keep your minds as open as a door whose only job is to be fair. And the jurors walk into the evening like people carrying cups filled to the brim, careful not to spill in public. The Crown's rebuttal is narrow and sharp, a lab supervisor with no romance in his voice and no vendetta in his eyes, a man whose sentences are built like squares, and he explains how the particularity of the cardigan fiber is not uniqueness, but uncommonness when viewed in the context of the samples retrieved and the control taken from the victim's verified wardrobe, and he explains the statistical scaffolding in a way that feels honest and almost sleepy, which is exactly what you want when the other side calls you a magician, and he refuses every invitation to sparkle, keeping his tone flat as a workbench, and the effect is bomb-proof. Then Lynn asks permission to present one more thing, a simple demonstration not of theatrics but of material, and with the court's indulgence, she wheels in a window frame, salvaged from a building of the same period, not the original, never the original. And she shows the latch motion with two techniques, one clean and one rushed, and in the rushed technique, the metal edge skims the base of the thumb if the wrist angle is wrong, and she shows the place a cut would live, and the room sees it without being told, and the defense objects not to the reality, but to its seduction, and the judge allows the demonstration with the reminder that jurors must keep theory in its proper casing, and the jurors nod, like people who will examine their own hands that night for no reason at all. Closing arguments approach like weather you can smell long before clouds gather and the city begins to draft its own in kitchens and ride shares and on benches where the courthouse pigeons listen like old women who have seen everything twice. And the Crown prepares a narrative assembled from patient bricks, never leaping, never skipping, always building toward a weight that the structure can bear. And the defense prepares an intricate orchard of doubt, branches crossing shadows, fruit that looks real until you touch it. And the judge sharpens instructions that remind everyone that the destination is not a feeling but a threshold. And thresholds are not poems, they are lines that law drew because grief alone cannot draw them without shaking. On the night before closings, Lynn returns to Mia's old block with permission and stands at the foot of the service stair again, and hears a laugh from a new tenant's party drift out an open window, and the sound is not disrespectful. It is life doing its stubborn job, and she touches the rail and feels the city in it cold and worn and available. And she says a small sentence aloud that nobody hears, "I will carry you carefully," and then she goes home and lays out her index cards like a deck. A magician refuses to gimmick, each card a plain word that has learned to sing in a choir. Cord, cardigan, mug, clock, ring, latch, doorstop, cut, cash, time, witness, window, oranges, and she looks at the pile and feels neither triumph nor despair. She feels the modest heat of competence, and competence is the furnace that keeps these rooms warm when headlines blow their cold through the cracks. Morning arrives clean and gray, and the courtroom takes its seats, and the judge looks like a lighthouse, not dramatic but consistent, and the bailiff announces the ritual, and somewhere in the back a pen runs out of ink, and the sound of the cap clicking off, another pen carries farther than it should. Because everything carries farther than it should in weeks like this, and Lydia sits, and the defendant sits, and the jurors arrange their notebooks in a row as if they are laying out instruments before a concert. And the Crown stands to speak, and the defense waits to follow, and the city listens through its people, ears scattered across bus lines and offices and kitchens, where coffee warms the hands of those who cannot bear to watch the stream. And somewhere, in a room with a window that remembers a bowl of fruit, light falls across a sill in a way that makes color look like defiance. And that is the only kind of light worth following out of rooms like this. The light that refuses to forget what was lost while insisting that forgetting is not how honor works. Closing arguments arrive like weather fronts meeting over a lake, air pressing against air, pressure dropping in a room that can feel it in the walls, and the Crown begins with a map that refuses shortcuts. A slow walk that respects the distance between object and inference, between inference and conclusion, and Detective Jessa Lynn watches from the second row with her hands relaxed on her knees the way she was taught to sit when storms pass near, and the prosecutor's voice is not flourished, it is measured, building a sentence you can live inside rather than applaud, and piece by piece the room is reassembled. The hallway light that stayed on, the unplugged clock that chose silence, the phone cord that remembered touch, the cardigan fiber that learned to speak under a better lamp, the mug lip that carried a thin whisper. The emergency room log with its cut that reads like a cautionary note in the margin of that week, the cash antiseptic pads, the refusal to remove a jacket, the service stair with a rubber doorstop giving 1 inch to anyone who knew what to do with it, the latch motion that slices the base of the thumb when hurried hands choose arrogance over care. And each element is not an island, but a bridge to the next, and the prosecutor does not pretend to offer certainty where science offers lanes and probabilities. Instead, he stacks the lanes until they resemble a road, and tells the jurors that walking it is not an act of faith, but of duty. He returns, again and again, to ordinary things. A coffee ring that stamps a time the clock tried to erase. A window trick taught in the name of help that became a key kept in a pocket. A reputation polished with small favors until it reflected back only goodwill. He asked no one to hate a man. He asked them to read a pattern. He asked them to believe objects when memory tries to bargain. He names Mia once, not as a symbol, but as a person, briefly and carefully, so the room can calibrate feeling and then return to the track that law requires. And when he is done, the air holds the shape of his route like footprints in powder snow, crisp enough to follow if you choose to lift your feet the same way. The defense stands into the same weather with a different instrument, and he begins with an axiom that no one can afford to deny, that doubt is protection against power, that time erodes edges, that once a case grows a headline, it can swallow other names that never had a chance to introduce themselves. And he invites the jury to see each piece not as a brick, but as a balloon, colorful, floating, in need of string, and he cuts string after string, transfer and commingling, the promiscuity of fibers, the promiscuity of contact in shared spaces, the statistical caution required when partials hum together, the fallibility of old notes, the fatigue in a first responder's hand, the unreliability of a nurse's memory after thousands of nights, the way a decent person can be made to look like a shadow in the right light. And he does this with a craftsman's calm rather than a showman's sweat, because calm is the flavor of credibility in a room where panic would be disqualifying. He asks the jurors to protect the future from the past mistakes by refusing to be hurried now. He does not say the word innocence. He says the word maybe until it feels like a lullaby. He holds up a single index card of his own. Not enough. He suggests that the crown has etched a constellation onto a ceiling that already had pinpricks of light and then named it after the man they brought you. He ends where he began, with duty. If you are not sure, you must say so out loud. The judge's instructions are a lighthouse blinking steady through the remaining weather. Elements, burdens, definitions that turn feelings into measurements, how to weigh credibility without liking or disliking anyone, how to treat science without magic or contempt, how to keep sympathy from walking into the deliberation room wearing a juror's coat, how to distinguish the absence of proof from proof of absence, how to decide together while thinking alone, and as she speaks, pens move again in a collective choreography. 12 people copying guardrails they will need when the road narrows. They file out with their notebooks pressed to their chests, a procession that looks like nothing and means everything, and the door closes with the soft finality of a glove being removed. The courthouse exhales into the marble. Reporters tilt their heads as if the wood will whisper. The defendant sits very still, his stillness a posture he has practiced for months. Lydia folds her hands in her lap and stares not at him and not at the crown, but at a small hole in the carpet, and she thinks about things that had holes in them. Alibis, narratives, sweaters, afternoons. Lynn waits on a bench by the window where pigeons bounce like punctuation marks along the sill, and she studies their commas and their periods and their apostrophes and thinks about sentences that end and sentences that must not. Deliberation is not a drum roll. It is a long, low hum. Inside an anonymous room, chairs scrape softly. A laminated list of do-nots sits clipped to a corkboard. 12 people take the measure of each other as if choosing a tempo for music they did not write. They nominate a 4-person with a sentence as small as an apology. They set out their notebooks like place settings and take turns reading back the parts the others did not hear as sharply. Cord, cardigan, mug, clock, ring, latch, doorstop, cut, cash, timing, behavior. Someone makes a timeline and tapes it to the wall with the cautious joy of a person putting order where chaos had squatted for years. Another draws a crude floor plan out of memory and confesses that drawing rooms makes her feel calmer, and half the table murmurs in recognition because architecture is everyone's first language, even when we forget we learned it. They talk about the nurse's jacket memory and how memory can be both a photograph and a watercolor, and a retired machinist at the end of the table, a man whose work taught him to respect metal and the ways it can teach skin lessons, describes the base of the thumb as a place tools punish, and he turns his hand to show the old white line that confirms the claim. And a teacher beside him adds that bodies repeat histories they never intended to write, and both comments sit in the air without voting yet. They argue respectfully about fibers. A young juror who reads Science for Pleasure uses phrases he learned alone at 3 in the morning, staring at medical journals he did not need to read. And he tells the table that rare is not unique and uncommon is not destiny, but uncommon in the right address becomes persuasive. And an older juror who trusts common sense more than calculus says she does not need to know the percentages to hear the rhyme. And they discover they are saying the same thing with different dialects, and they leave the disagreement where it belongs, out in the hall. They return to the word helpful and its long shadow. They tell stories they never told in voir dire because the judge did not ask that question, and because sometimes your own life embarrasses you when it contains a pattern you did not want to recognize, and they do not put those stories down in the minutes, but they do let them inform the way they hear the latch trick, the linger in doorways, the habit of arriving without insisting. They replay the old tape and notice the throat clear again, and then lecture themselves for noticing it, and a nurse on the panel offers that bodies make noise when words carry too much weight, and the machinist nods and says machines do too. They perform the judge's exercise of subtracting items to see what remains. If you take away the mug, what stands? If you take away the fiber, what stands? If you take away the log, what stands? If you take away the doorstop and the stair and the janitor's generosity, what stands? And when they reduce it to nearly nothing, enough remains that hands on the table flatten, and someone says quietly that sometimes a structure has more beams than you expect because you never looked up until you were asked to. Hunger arrives disguised as impatience and is dismissed with crackers parceled out like communion. They do not vote. They take inventories of uncertainties and park them on a sheet labeled questions to revisit, and the list shrinks and grows and then holds steady. They request readbacks. Court reporters become conductors of memory, replaying voices through paper. Outside, the city performs the waiting it has perfected. Courthouse steps are a theater of shrugging and pacing and theories spoken into phones that cannot change anything. The lake sends in a breeze that smells like pennies and rain. The bakery with the oranges sells out early because people have decided to honor someone they never met with citrus, and the owner does not explain it when customers ask. She only points to the empty bowl and says, "Today it meant something." Lynn paces the hallway in measured laps and refuses to imagine a verdict because imagination is the wrong tool for this task. She thinks instead about future habit, the memos she will propose about latches and stairwells and how to teach favor economies to keep receipts. She thinks about rookies and how to keep them from surrendering to cynicism or sentimentality, the twin cliffs on either side of the road. She writes 2 sentences in her notebook. The job is the weather, not the headline. And the headline is for the living, not the dead, and she closes the notebook because mantras should not be displayed. Evening softens the building. Deliberations pause and resume the next morning with a communal nod and a relighting of fluorescent patience. The foreperson suggests a straw poll, not as a vote, but as a way to map the room. Slips of paper whisper, the numbers are closer than anyone expected to whatever they expected, and yet not final. They speak more carefully now, recognizing the stakes, respecting the instruction that unanimity is not a trick you perform, but a place you arrive. They ask for the window frame again, and 2 jurors mime the latch motion in the air, embarrassed and earnest, and one catches the base of his thumb against an invisible edge and flinches at his own imagination, and everyone laughs, small and bright, because laughter returns oxygen to rooms like this when words have used it up. By noon, a shape emerges, not because anyone surrendered, but because doubt, when honored fully, sometimes sits down next to proof and admits the company is not hostile. They circle the table one by one without show. This is where I am and why. This is what I needed and what I received. This is the bridge I crossed and the one I refused. And the last juror, a quiet woman who has asked the fewest questions and taken the most notes, says, "I did not want to be first or last, but I am last. And I have asked the evidence to hold me the way a railing holds a person crossing at night, and I feel held. The bailiff is called. The room stands. The hallway inhales. The courtroom receives them as if the benches have learned to breathe. The judge asks the oldest question in this building. The foreperson answers it with words that move the air. And whatever those words are, the room will never forget how they sounded in that second. And the city, listening through its people scattered on buses and in kitchens and on factory floors where radios play low, hears the tone more than the syllables, the gravity more than the grammar, and Lydia closes her eyes like someone stepping into sun after a winter tunnel, and Lynn keeps her face still and her pulse steady and does the next necessary thing, which is to keep standing upright while the world tilts around the word that was just spoken. Outside, reporters give the weather a new name. Headlines find their verbs. The lake holds its face without commentary. The bakery places a fresh bowl of oranges on the counter. A service stair in another building somewhere receives feet with an echo that could be anyone's. A detective writes an email about doorstops. A mother decides to walk home by the long route because some distances deserve to be walked. And high above the old apartment, a window remembers how a latch feels when it is lifted with care instead of hurry. And that memory is not evidence, not something you can enter into a record, but it is part of the city's archive now, the one that lives in the hands of those who learned a new way to hold them open and a new way to close them. The verdict echoes after it is spoken, not as a cheer or a sob, but as a structural shift inside the building. A load-bearing wall moved 1 inch in every room, adjusting its breath, and the judge begins to speak about dates and next steps and sentencing reports and victim impact statements, while the clock in the rear denies drama by keeping perfect time. And Detective Jessa Lynn allows herself a single quiet inhale that tastes like paper and old varnish, and then she stands, because standing is what the living do after a word like this enters a room. And Lydia does not look at the defendant as he is led away. She looks at the space he no longer occupies, and she decides she will only fill that space with her daughter's name. And outside the courthouse, the city performs its ritual of translation, turning law into language, language into headlines, headlines into dinner talk. And somewhere on a tram, a stranger reads the line, "Toronto, 1993 cold case solved," and closes their eyes for a stop because relief requires privacy even when it belongs to someone else. The days between verdict and sentencing are narrow bridges with wind on both sides, and the prosecution team works the checklist that keeps justice from drifting into theater. Pre-sentence reports requested, assessments scheduled, schedules stitched into a calendar that refuses to be hurried, and the defense files the papers they must file to preserve the future's arguments. And nobody ridicules the ritual, because ritual is the cost of living in a civilization where vengeance is not allowed to wear judicial robes. And Lynn returns to the precinct to close loops and write memos and answer emails that begin with congratulations and end with questions about method. And she answers in the flat grammar of competence, because triumph is a solvent that erases hard-won habits if you let it, and she will not let it. And at night she walks the old block once more with permission and no purpose except to listen to what doors sound like when they close gently. To remember how weather can be read in hinges and rails and latches, and she makes notes that begin with words like training and policy and stairwells. The community adjusts in small clicks. The bakery keeps its bowl of oranges near the register, and a note taped to the glass says, "For Mia, bright even in winter," and nobody vandalizes that note, which is a miracle disguised as courtesy. And the old building super writes a letter to the tenants that includes a drawing of the latch mechanism and a sentence about refusing quiet favors that demand time alone. And he posts it in the mailroom, where flyers usually advertise lost cats and weekend sales. And the letter is read because the tenants understand that kindness is a door that must be kept in working order, maintained, tested, respected. Lydia meets with the victim services counselor to prepare for the moment when her voice will enter the record as more than a mother's grief and not yet a history book. And she practices speaking in a tone that will not break, even if the words ask her to break. And she chooses to talk about oranges and winter and the laugh that loved elevators and the way her daughter wrote phone numbers on tiny squares and pinned them to a corkboard with sewing needles because she liked the look of the silver dots. And she chooses not to talk about horror because horror has had enough airtime. And she chooses not to ask why, because the courtroom is finished with why, and because why is a trap that catches feet and keeps them there until the person falls. And when she leaves the meeting, she sits on a bench near the lake, and a goose watches her with the absolute confidence of a bird that has learned the city's rules. And she laughs a little because life continues to be absurd even when it is also sacred. Appeals talk begins in corridors where voices do not echo, and the defense consults with specialists who speak the dialect of procedure like surgeons discussing bone. And the list they produce is sober rather than sensational. And that sobriety comforts and frightens the city at once, because it means the fight is not fireworks but paperwork, not a revolution but an audit. And Lynn respects that too, because respect for the machine is how you keep it from breaking for everyone. And she prepares to testify at a sentencing hearing about impact on the investigation and the years of civic trust bent by a friendly face. And she writes drafts that she trims until they fit inside the container the court can accept, because feelings must be translated into nouns and verbs that do not crack under cross. Reporters pivot to retrospective packages, the rise of cold cases in a city that thought time favored the kind, the science that teaches old cotton to sing, the detectives who talk to boxes as if they hold breath, and the pieces are mostly careful, and when they are not careful, the city shrugs and the precinct ignores it, because you cannot teach good journalism with anger any more than you can teach architecture with shouting. You teach by showing the rooms you built and letting people walk them and feel where the beams are and where the air moves. In the interim, quiet consequences cascade. A landlord in another neighborhood replaces every latch in a building because he watched the demonstration and felt his own thumb twinge, and he sends a note that says, "Consider this courtesy," and the tenants reply with awkward thank yous that admit how hard it is to learn suspicion without poisoning your own well. And a volunteer program rewrites its boundaries and prints them. Favors now require partners. No more solo visits, no more long doorways, no more lingering in kitchens. And the change is not an indictment of kindness, but a plan for keeping it. And those who dislike the bureaucracy are reminded gently that structure is how tenderness survives. A letter arrives for Lydia with no return address, and it contains a picture from a long-ago barbecue where Mia is mid-bite and trying not to laugh because the photographer told a joke too soon. And the sender writes, "I found this in a drawer, and I thought it belonged in the story again." And Lydia pins it above her table with a sewing needle and decides that some archives should be domestic, and that memory can be curated without making a museum of your heart, and that curating is an act of resistance against the way violence tries to become the last page. In a conference room, Lynn gathers rookies and opens the deck of plain index cards she carried through the trial, and she lays them on a table and asks the room to read them out loud. One card per voice, and the rookies do, and the words are ordinary and heavy, and none of them are adjectives. And she tells them this is how you build a case across decades, with nouns that hold shape and verbs that don't perform. And she shows them a blank card and says, "This is for your future cold case that is hot in someone's kitchen right now. Write the first word when you find it." And they do, and the exercise turns anxiety into posture, and posture into habit. Sentencing day carries a different heat. The benches fill with people who have practiced their faces and their stillness, and the air is bright with the hum of fluorescent patience, and the judge asks if there are statements, and there are, and Lydia stands at a lectern that has hosted every emotion a city can produce. And she speaks in a voice that began at a kitchen table and traveled through a winter and now arrives here intact. And she does not mention the man. She mentions the bowl on the sill and the winter that discovered color, and the way joy is a small discipline, not a lightning strike. And she mentions the way a door can become a teacher. And she asks the court to remember that verdicts are only the beginning of honoring the dead. That honor is daily and domestic and civic. And the courtroom learns a new silence, the kind that stands rather than crouches, and when she steps down, even the defense team watches her go, with a respect that has nothing to do with winning. The defendant's statement, read by counsel, is not an apology, and the city hears the absence like a clock unplugged, and the judge proceeds with the arithmetic the law allows. This many years for this, that many for that. Concurrent, consecutive, credit for time served, and the number lands like a weight put exactly where the engineer intended it. And debates will continue, because debates are the civic muscle we keep strong. But the room accepts the placement for now, and the bailiff takes a step to signal the choreography that will end the moment. Outside, cold rain begins without ceremony, and umbrellas bloom, and headlines update, and a stranger sets a single orange on the courthouse steps and walks away, and nobody picks it up, because offerings need their own gravity to matter. In the weeks that follow, appeals are noticed, and icing begins to set on the edges of a cake that will not be cut for some time. And Lynn moves forward without changing her gait, because victory is not a permission slip to rest in a city that wakes up every day to fresh emergencies, and she works a new file where a voice on a tape says help, and then nothing, and she flips a blank index card and writes one word and starts again, and she also mails her memo about stairwells and latches and doorstops to every precinct commander who will tolerate a detective telling them how buildings breathe. And many tolerate it, and some ignore it, and a few send thanks that feel like alliances, and alliances are how you change weather. The old building where Mia lived replaces the carpet and repaint the hall with a color that does not mimic the past. And someone plants a window box on the third floor with hardy greens that do not mind frost. And a tenant opens the service stair door one afternoon and hears the new hinge whisper instead of squeal. And he stands there a long time, letting the whisper retune his idea of what a building can sound like when it is safe. Lydia helps organize a winter fundraiser for a shelter, not as an answer to anything but as a habit that fits her hands. And she writes a small speech she will not read. And she brings a bag of satsumas and places them in a bowl near the coat check and watches as people take one without knowing why and leave a donation without needing to be asked twice. And afterward she walks home through air that smells like metal and water, and she thinks maybe memory can taste like citrus, and that is better than letting it taste like ash. And she knows there will be days when everything tastes like ash again. And she knows that knowing both is the only honest way to be. The press moves on in its way, but the neighborhood does not. The neighborhood absorbs instead, and the lessons settle like silt in a river that runs clearer because it learned how to slow around the stones. And there are new stones now, notice posted, protocols adopted, names remembered in ordinary ways. And in a class at a community center, a volunteer teaches teenagers how to read apartments for safety the way photographers read light. And she says, kindness is not canceled, it is scheduled. It has a witness, it has a time limit, it has a door open to a hallway, and the teenagers scoff and then make fun of the phrasing, and then later repeat it to each other in hallways, which is how instructions become folklore, which is how cities protect themselves without pretending they are forts. One night, months later, Lynn sits with her rookies after a long shift, and they talk about the case the way soldiers talk about a campaign after the maps are rolled and the raincoats are hung. And she reminds them gently that we do not own the word closure, that the best we can hope to own is competence. And competence is a warm coat in a winter that does not end. And one of the rookies asks if she ever thinks about the unplugged clock, and she says yes, all the time. And he asks what she thinks, and she says, I think about how the room tried to stop telling time and how the city refused. And the rookies nod and nobody writes it down because that is not an index card sentence, it is a kitchen sentence. And kitchen sentences are how people remember what matters when the folder is closed. The city sleeps some nights and not others. The lake keeps its face indifferent and faithful. Doors open and close. Latches click with honest sounds in buildings that chose honest maintenance. And somewhere a bowl of oranges sits on a sill and glows faintly in the dark like a small lighthouse for a single apartment. And in that glow there is a promise the city makes to itself and to its dead. Not that harm will never happen again, but that harm will never again be allowed to dress as hospitality without being challenged. And that promise is not law exactly, and not policy exactly, and not grief exactly, but a braid of all three. And Detective Jessalyn, walking home past the bakery after another late night at her desk, sees the bowl in the window and touches the glass lightly with the side of her hand and keeps moving, because movement is the only way this city knows how to honor its promises, and because somewhere, on a shelf, a fresh index card waits for a first word.